They told me not to touch anything in the Queen's reading room, and for the first 4 months I didn't. I dusted the hallway outside it. I polished the door handle, which nobody else had thought to polish, and I never once turned it. My name is Ruth Calder. I was 58 years old when the Vey court hired me, and I had crossed more empty space than I care to think about to take a housekeeper's post in a palace built of pale stone and colder manners, on a world where the sky runs violet at noon. I did not ask for the posting. I answered an ad, same as anyone answers an ad when the alternative is an empty house on earth, with a husband's tools still hanging on the pegboard in the garage, untouched, because touching them felt like admitting he wasn't coming back to use them. The Vey are a tall, pale blue people, elegant, in a way that makes you feel like a smudge on good linen. Their court runs on quiet, and on rules nobody writes down but everybody knows. And the rule about the Queen's reading room was the quietest one of all. Queen Estelle had died the winter before I arrived, some wasting illness their physicians never named in front of staff, and when she went, the king ordered her rooms sealed exactly as she'd left them, books open to the pages she'd been reading, her shawl over the chair, and on the low table by the window, a songbird box, brass and glass, the kind of mechanical toy that's supposed to open its wings and sing when you wind the key. It hadn't sung since she died. The mechanism had jammed, and every royal engineer who'd been sent to look at it had come out again within the hour, saying it was too old, too delicate, that opening the casing risked ruining it for good, and that no one wanted to be the one who broke the last thing the Queen had touched. So it sat there, silent, and the room sat around it, held its breath, and nobody went in, except to dust what didn't need dusting. I went in the day the steward, a stiff, careful man named Corin, forgot to lock the door behind him. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't sympathy, not at first. It was habit. 40 years of habit. My husband Dell ran a clock and instrument repair shop out of our garage for 30 of those years, and I sat across the workbench from him most evenings, threading tiny screws, holding parts steady with tweezers, while his hands, bigger and clumsier than mine, did the delicate work, or sometimes it was the other way around, and my hands did it while his held the lamp. I know the sound a jammed mechanism makes when you shake it gently near your ear. I knew it the second I picked up that songbird box to move it an inch, so I could dust beneath it, and something inside it gave a small, dry click. I should have set it down. I didn't. I found a sewing needle in my apron. I always carry one, for buttons, for hems, for exactly nothing important, and I turned the box over in the window light and found the little access seam along its base, no bigger than a coin. I worked it open with the flat of the needle. Inside, everything was miniature and gold-toned and finer than anything Dell ever fixed. But the trouble wasn't fine at all. One tine of the tuning comb had been knocked sideways, probably years ago, probably by nothing more dramatic than being carried across a room too quickly. It had been catching on the cylinder ever since, one tooth out of 40, silencing the whole thing. I didn't have Dell's proper tools. I had a needle and steady hands, and 30 years of watching him do exactly this kind of small, unglamorous correction. I braced the comb with my thumbnail and bent the tine back, a fraction of a millimeter, no more than you'd nudge a stuck zipper. Then I wound the key. The songbird box opened its little glass wings and sang. It wasn't a grand sound. It was thin and tinny and old-fashioned, the kind of tune that was probably considered sentimental even when it was new. But it filled that shut, silent room like water filling a cracked bowl, and I stood there with a needle in my hand and my heart going hard, because I hadn't heard anything sound that alive in the whole 4 months I'd been in that palace. I didn't hear the door. "It hasn't done that," the king said, "in a year." I turned around too fast, the needle still between my fingers, and there he was, Ossian Vey, tall and pale blue and dressed like a man who'd stopped dressing for anyone's benefit a long time ago, standing in the doorway of his dead wife's reading room, listening to a toy sing. I should have apologized. I should have set the box down and backed out and let Corin dismiss me before the week was out. Instead, I told him the truth, because I was too startled to build anything prettier. "One of the tines was bent, Your Majesty. It's a small thing. It only looked broken. Every engineer I sent told me it couldn't be touched. They were probably right not to trust their own hands with it," I said. It's not that kind of work. It's not an engineer's work. It's a mender's work. You don't force it, you just nudge it back where it was always meant to sit. He came further into the room, slow, like a man walking somewhere he hadn't let himself walk in a year. He looked at the box a long moment, and then he looked at me, and I watched him do the thing people do when they're deciding whether to ask a question they're afraid of the answer to. How does a housekeeper know a comb tine from a hinge pin? I could have said nothing. It was well within my rights to say nothing. None of it was any business of a king's, my hands or my history, or my husband's garage 600 light years from that room. But something about the way the song was still winding down, thin and sweet and stubborn, made it feel like the wrong moment to be careful. My husband mended things like this, I said, for a living, and then just because his hands wouldn't stop wanting to, even after his eyes went bad and his back went worse. I sat with him most evenings for 30 years, doing exactly what I just did to your wife's box. He died 2 years ago. I took this post because I couldn't stand being in a house where all his tools were sitting still. I hadn't told anyone that. Not Corin, not the other staff, not the agency that placed me. I don't know why I told a king in a dead woman's reading room, except that grief has a way of recognizing its own reflection, even when it's wearing a stranger's face. He didn't say he was sorry, which I was glad of. I'd had enough of that particular kindness from people who didn't mean it. He just nodded, slow, like something in him had clicked back into place the same way that Tyne had. She used to wind it every morning, he said. I stopped coming in here because the silence felt more honest than pretending it still sang. I think I had it backward. Grief doesn't need silence to prove it's real, I said, before I could stop myself. Sometimes it just needs one small thing put right. He was quiet a while after that. Then he asked me, not ordered, asked, whether I would be willing to come into that room from time to time, not to replace anything, not to pretend at anything, just to keep the small mechanisms of it turning, the way she had, the way I understood, without being taught. Wind the box, air the books, let the room breathe again instead of holding its breath. Corin objected, of course, quietly and at length, about propriety and precedent, about a housekeeper being given the run of the Queen's private rooms. He stood very straight when he said it, the way careful men do when they're more frightened than angry, and I understood him better than he knew. He'd been the one sending engineers in and out of that room for a year, watching each of them fail and each failure make the silence a little more permanent, a little more like a verdict. Letting someone in with a needle instead of a diagnostic kit must have felt, to him, like watching a man walk into a museum and start rearranging the exhibits. The king heard him out, all of it, patiently, and then overruled him with 4 words I've kept ever since. She isn't replacing her. I go into that room most mornings now. I wind the songbird box, and it sings, thin and a little off-key and completely alive, and some mornings the king comes and stands in the doorway and just listens, the way you'd listen to weather or to your own heartbeat, something you'd stopped noticing until it nearly stopped for good. Nobody calls me a replacement anymore. I never was one. I was only ever a woman who knew how to sit still with a broken thing until it remembered how to work.